Okay, so today we're unpacking a pretty wild geopolitical theory. It connects America's entire economy to a global financial empire, and you won't believe this, it ends with a truly shocking prediction about where the US is headed. Let's get right into it.
Wow. Yeah, there it is. That's the prediction right from the source material. A war with Iran that America loses, shattering the entire global order. So the big question is, how on earth could anyone arrive at a conclusion like that? It sounds crazy, right? Well, to even begin to understand the logic, we have to rewind and look at this huge, fundamental shift that happened deep inside the American economy.
So here's the first piece of the puzzle. The theory basically says you can't get a grip on America's place in the world today unless you understand how its whole economic engine changed. I mean, it went from a country that makes stuff to a country that moves money. So think about it like this. For a few decades, from the 50s to about 1980, the US was all about manufacturing, a powerhouse. The theory goes that its factory workers were like the wealthiest middle class in history. They had stable jobs, good pay, real political clout. But then, after 1980, everything just flipped. All that power, all that wealth, it started flowing to Wall Street, creating what the source calls a professional manager elite on the coasts. This completely changed the game, rewriting who really holds power in America. And look at this chart. I mean, the numbers really tell the story, don't they? Back in the 60s, manufacturing was a monster chunk of the US economy, 40%. Fast forward to today, and it's basically collapsed to just 10%. And at the same time, you see financial services just ballooning up to 22%. That's more than double what manufacturing is now. It's a total, complete reversal. Okay, so this big shift has a name. Financialization. And according to the theory, it's had some massive consequences. We're talking deeper political divides, an economy that's way more speculative, more about betting on asset prices than actually building a factory. It's also fueled these huge asset bubbles, and of course, soaring inequality. It all leads to what's called a rentier economy, which is a fancy way of saying a system where you get rich by owning stuff, not by making stuff. All right, so you might be wondering, what does all this economic stuff at home have to do with America's power around the world? Well, here's the core of the argument. The theory says this financialized economy isn't just a domestic issue, it's the very heart of a modern American empire. Let's dig into how it was actually built. Okay, so here's a quick history lesson. After World War II, at Bretton Woods, the US dollar becomes the world's main currency. But, and this is key, it was backed by actual gold. Then in 1971, President Nixon cuts that tie. The dollar is no longer backed by gold, so what gives it value now? The answer, just 2 years later, was oil. The petrodollar system is created. And by the time the Cold War wraps up in 91, America is basically the sole undisputed architect of this whole new global money system. And you really have to understand the petrodollar, because it is the absolute linchpin of this whole thing. Think about it. Every major economy needs oil. And if you make a rule that oil can only be bought with US dollars, then every single country on Earth has to get their hands on dollars. This creates this constant, kind of artificial demand for American money, and that gives the US an unbelievable amount of economic power. So here's where it gets really interesting. The theory claims this whole system acts like a giant global wealth funnel. Here's how it works. Step 1. Other countries sell stuff to the US and get paid in trillions of dollars. Step 2. That wealth doesn't really trickle down to their own people. It gets captured by a small elite at the top. So step 3, what do these elites do with all those dollars? They look for the safest place in the world to park their money, which means they turn right around and pour it back into US assets, stocks, bonds, real estate, you name it.
And the end result of that massive global funnel, it's this, a single staggering number. According to the source, the United States today holds 60% of all the stock market wealth in the entire world. Just look at this table to see how wild that 60% figure really is. I mean, the next country on the list, Japan, has just 6%. And China, the second biggest economy on the planet, only 3%. The argument here isn't that this is a sign of a healthy, productive economy. No, the theory says this is a sign of a giant speculative imbalance. All the world's wealth piling up in one single basket. Okay, so you have this incredible empire of finance, this massive structure. But the theory says the entire thing is built on a really fragile foundation. It all hinges on one simple belief, that America is untouchable, that your money is safe there because of its military power. So what happens if someone starts kicking at that foundation?
What happens when that belief gets challenged? At the end of the day, it's all about perception. That's the key word. Why do trillions of dollars keep flowing into U.S. assets? It's because foreign investors believe in the stability that's guaranteed by America's military. The dollar is only safe as long as the empire is seen as being invincible. That's the logic. And this is where the war in Ukraine comes into the picture. The source frames it as a direct challenge to exactly that perception. It basically characterizes Russia's actions as saying, I'm going to show the world that you, America, are actually a paper tiger. The goal is to prove America isn't invincible, because if that perception shatters, the whole financial empire could come tumbling down. So this is it. This is the big, scary question at the heart of this whole theory. What happens if the rest of the world stops buying it, stops believing America is invincible? If that faith is gone, global investors could start pulling their money out fast. They could start dumping U.S. stocks, U.S. bonds, and that could trigger a complete, catastrophic collapse of the entire system. And that brings us to the final and, honestly, the most chilling part of this whole theory. Okay, so if you're the empire and the foundation, your perceived invincibility is starting to crack, what do you do? What are your options to save the whole system? Well, according to this argument, the options are not great. They're dangerously limited. The theory essentially lays out three possible paths. Option 1, reindustrialize. Go back to being a productive economy that makes things. But that's seen as way too slow, and besides, the powerful financial sector would never let it happen. They'd block it. Okay, so option 2, just let the system collapse. Obviously, that's unthinkable for the elites who benefit from the whole thing. So that leaves option 3, the easiest political option. Go to war and make a huge, spectacular show of force to prove you're still in charge. And this is how we circle all the way back to that shocking prediction from the beginning. Why Iran specifically? Well, according to this theory, a war with Iran would be an attempt to hit 3 birds with 1 stone. First, it would be a massive show of military dominance, designed to scare everyone back into line and restore confidence in the dollar. Second, it would give the U.S. direct control over a huge source of oil, the thing that backs the petrodollar system. And third, it puts America in control of some of the most critical shipping lanes on the planet. But wait a second, why would you ever risk a war that you might actually lose? It seems insane, right? The source has an answer for that, and it's a classic trap we've seen throughout history: Imperial hubris. It's this idea that an empire gets so powerful, so used to winning and calling the shots, that it literally cannot imagine a future where it loses. And that exact arrogance is what leads it to take these huge existential risks that could, ironically, be the very thing that brings it down. So, at the end of the day, this whole explainer leaves us with a pretty heavy question to think about. If this theory holds any water, if an empire built on finance really does need to constantly prove its strength through military force just to keep the system going, then what is the true cost of that empire? What is the ultimate price of that dominance? And maybe more importantly, who is the one who ultimately pays it?